We're gonna start. We got all
Okay.
these. Listen, here we are. Here we go. Yes, episode 1.
Yes.
Yes, girl. So I'm Dr. B, the Black Renaissance woman, and I am joined today by
Rosalind Fleming.
yes,
Dr. Loading.
Dr. Loden. That part.
It's real close. Real close.
Girl, it's so close you can like touch it. And I'm so happy for you, girl. Yes. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. So again, this is the BRW Podcast. I am Dr. B, the Black Renaissance woman. On the BRW Podcast, we are going to use documentaries as springboards to conversations about any and everything and make connections to Black history and culture. So the documentary that we're going to be talking about today is In Our Mother's Gardens. It's a documentary you can find on Netflix by Chantrell P. Lewis. And I'm just really excited to dig into it. I think it's so important for us to tell our own stories. And so that's the part that I'm most excited about. So we're going to dig into what we heard and what we saw in the documentary. But really quickly, for those who haven't seen it, In Our Mother's Gardens is a documentary. It's a discussion and really a beautiful display of video clips, pictures, and Black women just telling their own experiences and stories about their relationships and things that they've learned from their mothers and their grandmothers. And so, you know, it's just us like discussing their lives, their ways of being, and their means of survival, really. Right. And so the documentary itself begins with an Alice Walker quote. And so I think it's just fitting if we start with that same quote. So the first quote that pops up on the screen is, "How simple a thing it seems to me that to know ourselves as we are, we must know our mother's names." And so if we could, sis, I just want to start by taking a moment to call our mother's names and our grandmothers, if that's okay with you.
Yes, for sure.
And just say a couple of things about them and who they are. I can start if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So first, my mom, Angela, is my mother, aka Angie or Miss Angie, to my friends. And her mother is Lena Lucille, and her mother is Mary. And so Lena and Mary are our ancestors now. But I did want to just start by acknowledging them. My mother, Angie, Miss Angie. One of the things I learned from her is I always say like my sense of style, right? Like Angie gonna put on the outfit. Like she's going to put on the outfit. She's going to have a purse to match. She's going to have a shoe. Like that's just it, right? Like she's going to have an outfit. I remember I had like a tragedy with my prom dress, right? In high school. Like my dress wasn't ready. And I was just like crying. I was panicking. I was like, I'm not even going. Girl, my mother was like, "No, you're going. Like, come get a dress out of my closet." Like, she has stuff. So I ended up wearing a dress from her closet. So I always appreciate like my mother's sense of style and ability to be like resourceful. She's the person who told me you always shop on the clearance rack first. I don't care what store you in. She was in the clearance rack first. So I love that. Yes, my grandmother Lena. Who was Lena? Lena was loud. She had a very distinct laugh. You can hear her coming before you see her. She drove Cadillacs, honey. They know her by name in a Cadillac dealer. She wore fur coats. She liked jewelry and hats and things like that. Don't play with her, right? She's an entrepreneur. She was a mother in her church. She was definitely somebody who liked to have control over things, right? Like she always thought she was the boss. But she loved people through food. Like anytime I went to her house or anybody came to her house, she was always trying to feed you, ask you if you want something to eat. Have you eaten? There's always a pot of greens on the stove, frying some chicken, frying some fish or whatever. My father always joke and say that they had the hottest house on the East Coast because it was always hot in there because she was always cooking. So that's my grandma Lena. And as far as her mother, my great grandmother, Mary, of course, I'm grateful and blessed to have known her. She died in the 90s though, so I was still young. And so I only knew her as like my great grandmother and I didn't know much about her. So as I was thinking about like this episode and as I was watching the documentary, I'm like committed to learning more about her, right? Like I remember going to her house and things like that, but I'm committed to learning more about her. So that's my lineage, right? So my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother. And of course I was fortunate to, know my grandmothers and great grandmother on my father's side as well. Yes. Go ahead, sis. Let's call your lineage.
I love that so much. Yes, I know Miss Angie. Miss Angie, yes. She lights up a room. It's so funny you describe her and your grandmother, and I see so many similarities. because
Yeah.
Miss Angie likes the room when she walks in as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to break this up from my maternal side as well as my paternal side, just because both of those are very important to me and have shaped who I am and how I exist. So maternally, starting with my mom, Tanya Nichelle Whitley, who goes by Tanya Nichelle Whitley Gray because she didn't drop her married name from her last husband. That's her business.
That's her business.
So that's Tanya Nichelle Whitley. Her mother was Mildred Rosalind Pickett, and my great grandmother was Rosa Pickett. And so Tanya, how would I describe her? I think I would describe her as like super ambitious. Like she does not take no's. Like she, she pushes down doors. She breaks barriers. I was challenged today. I was watching something about this bakery in New York where she was accepting EBTs and wanting to make sure that Black people experience pastries that typically we don't experience. And she's in the middle of the Bronx or Brooklyn, whichever one. And people are coming in like, what's a quiche? And there's this whole story. But when she was talking to the reporter said, well, you're a generational curse breaker. And she was like, no, I'm not a generational curse breaker. I'm a generational starter because I'm not breaking anything. I'm starting things. So I view my mom.
I like that.
As someone who has started a lot. Like her sacrifices in my youth were contributed to some of my trauma, but also contributed to my generational wealth. So it's so weird. Like I'm healing and I'm also benefiting from the sacrifices that she's made, right? That's why I think it's important to know that our mother's stories are so complex. Like why couldn't you do it this way? Or, you should have done this and you should have done that, but everybody has a story. So ambitious is a word I would describe her as. I would also describe her as a generational starter. She has been the first African-American of many things, whether it's the first African-American that had the highest GPA in her nursing program or the one to graduate her nursing program, the first African-American who has a private practice in our hometown.
Love it.
Carolina. That's busting out the seams. She is a Sigma Gamma Rho girl. She's also a Chi Eta Phi girl. So those things are very important to her identity because being in the community is very important to her and being able to give back because health equity is like an issue. Like it's a thing that she fights for. And so you have her like this advocate. This woman was very ambitious. And she's also like, aside from that professional part, she's very determined. She's also very controlling. She's a Cancer woman, so she wants things a certain kind of way. And for the longest time, I followed everything she said. And when you don't follow it, she like takes issue with it because she likes to give you directions and you should follow those. But then you have my grandmother where my mom is not as always vulnerable and always, I don't want to say soft, but I'm going to say soft, right? Because she is always fighting, right? She's whether fighting for her children, fighting for her community, she's always fighting. Whereas my grandmother was a homemaker. My mom was not. My mom was working all the time. My grandmother was a homemaker. She was married to my grandfather. She worked, but she also made sure that we were in Kingdom Hall on every Sunday. Fridays, we ate Chinese food, but every other day there was cooked meals every single day. She sat and spoke to us all the time, would just call us in the room and just like read the Bible to us. You could tell the quality time was really important to her. She would always say, she would always, just share her love for us. So she was very intimate with us. I was very intimate with my grandmother, and then her mom, which was my great grandmother Rosa. I experienced my grandma every time I went in. She too shared the story of always having a pot of collard greens on the stove with either fried chicken or pork chops or fat bat, whatever. But she was also, besides that, she had 8 children. And I may be misquoting. She might have had, I think it was 8. So my Aunt Betty Ann could tell me whether or not she is now the matriarch of our family. But she was the valedictorian of her class during a time where when I look at her class photo, it's only 12 of them in the photo. And so a lot of people that time they were sharecropping, and they had to work in the field, but she finished her education and then she went on to work in a restaurant cooking, right? And so that's my mom's side. My
Okay.
great grandmother, my experience with her is primarily through the story. So my family always reminds me that I stand on the shoulders of my great grandmother. They are very proud of her, just for her educational attainment and what she was able to accomplish education wise at a time that people were not doing that. And so my
Mm-hmm.
family thinks I'm like this genius, and I'm smart, but you know what I mean? But they definitely make sure that I know, like, listen, this is where you got it from. You ain't the first, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't new to this, right? You can't, this is in your blood. And
Yeah, and
so
that's important too, because like this whole thing, it's about lineage, right? So this
yeah,
whole conversation is like, we are our mothers and our grandmothers, and who they are, who they were, their
yes,
experiences, their stories have an impact on us and how we, develop our own self-concept.
yes, for sure. For sure. And speaking of self concept, I have my grandmother on my father's side who is very important to me.
Mhm.
She is a lot of my identity because she stood in the gap. My father was not, he wasn't as present. He also has a story. I mean, he had me at 18. And so he was his first year in college, did not know what he was doing. Here I come. Over the years while he was growing up and not being present, my grandmother stood in the gap financially, but also I was growing up in the South, but my grandma was in New York. And so there are some things that, I would bring to her and she's just like, that doesn't make sense. Like you should, so she really, my trait of questioning things, and my trait of not having fear and standing up for anything or whatever is not right or whatever doesn't sound right. I really get that from her. And she's still alive. She's my only living grandmother, and I call her quite frequently because now we're getting into that part of our relationship where I'm able to go past, like, now I'm trying to understand who she is, right? Like, I
Mhm.
know who you were to me. Like, my grandma she was born in South Carolina, but she migrated to New York at 18. And so she
Uh-huh.
would tell, she spent more time in New York than she spent in the South. However, she still has those Southern traditions. And she also, my grandfather is from the Virgin Islands. So she infused those things to make sure that we had our West Indian roots, because my grandfather, his accent was so thick. Like, I think
Uh-huh.
we understood him, but nobody else would. But my grandmother really wanted to make sure that we understood those, those pieces of our identity. But for some people, my grandmother, aggressive, assertive, don't take no mess. But I'm at the phase in my life where I know that every woman has a story. So I'm spending my time trying to understand like what her story is. So even
Yeah.
though the world may see this exterior shell where it's like it's hard, you can't get past it, I have actually shared a lot of intimate moments with my grandmother, who has told me a lot of things and perspectives about dating, about things that she went through with my grandfather, and also things that she witnessed in the South, such as seeing her father, her grandfather, or was, it might have been her father, who she believed was lynched by the
Mhm.
police. And so
Mhm.
just thinking about like all of these things that she saw in South Carolina and then who she is today, it kind of makes sense. And so
Yeah.
she is like a walking archive for me, because she, like, that side of my family is very historical. They love history, they love storytelling. And so I enjoy sitting and being in their presence, just listening to, just all of the things that have happened, within their life or within who they have become. So
Yeah.
those are all
So
the pieces of me.
yeah, girl.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing about your grandmothers and your mother, your lineage with us. I think one thing that was just popping out for me when you were speaking just now is this, our mothers, our grandmothers, us, all of us, right? We're humans and we're not one dimensional. And so when you were talking about all the different parts of your grandmother, it made me think about a point in the documentary. So the creator of the documentary, Chantrell Lewis, at one point, she was talking about her grandmother, and she said that her grandmother was a drinking woman, a smoking woman, and she went to church.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, right, for us to know and show our whole selves, right? Because we're not one dimensional. And if we don't show all those different pieces of us, I think we do a disservice to our daughters, right? We
Mhm.
do a disservice to, you know, the next generation, our nieces or whatever, the girls, our girls, if we don't show them all these different pieces of life, we're not giving them a realistic picture of what our experience is, right? What our human experience is as Black women. And so I think it was fitting that you brought that up, because that was something that I wanted to talk about. It's just like, no, I'm not just this part, that these people might see all the time. There are so many different parts to this thing, right? That is my life as a Black woman. And I think it's important for us to share that with our younger generation. So you are a mother of a daughter now, right? So how has your experiences and your relationship with your mother and your grandmothers shape the way that you mother your daughter?
Yeah. So I think that I try to figure out the best of me and try to give it to her, like the best experiences that I've had, and try to give it to her. And so intimacy is very important, right? And I try to give that to her as an experience, right? So I have a daughter that is very sensitive, but I'm also trying to raise someone who is in touch with their emotions so that they're aware of them and they can advocate for them. And also I'm trying to make sure that my daughter has a safe space. My safest space, I didn't experience a safe space until adulthood with my grandmother on my maternal side. And so it was, for me, safety is being able to cry. Like I felt like with my mom, I wasn't really able to cry. It was just like, the one time I cried, she was just like, I think I was crying over a boy. And she was like, girl, please wipe them tears. You better get on. And, it made me feel, even though it was like a boss thing to do, like you ain't crying over no dude. It still made me feel like I needed to.
You can be vulnerable.
Yeah. And because things do hurt, right? And we need to lean into that, right? And the more that we ignore what hurts us, the more we're not dealing with it and we're sweeping it under the rug and we're not really able to identify like who we are. And so, whereas my grandmother, on the other hand, when I cry, she just hold me, right? And so thinking about those levels of safety, that like psychological safety that I felt with my grandmother, I want to be able to pass that on to my daughter. And so that is the biggest thing that I'm working on during this time. But then, there's that intersectionality is one thing that I'm noticing is that I do that probably like 40% of the time, but there are moments, or maybe I do it 70% of the time, but there are moments where I'm my mom, like, I don't feel like hearing this crying, you know what I mean? Or, I don't have time for this today. And I really try to like make room for her emotions so that she's able to identify them and she's not silenced.
Yeah.
And that can be hard. So I try to bring those experiences to her, just trying to figure out what human am I trying to raise and how do I make sure that I'm not doing a lot of like critiquing, which I'm not good at. My mom critiqued me a lot. So it made me somewhat for a while, like a very much so like a type A person, or a person that seriously judged herself all the time. So I don't need nobody else judging me. I'm already judging myself because of the experience culture that I had. And so that is a piece that kind of is like innate. And I try to catch myself when I find myself doing that with my daughter. But those are experiences that I have to like monitor. So those are like the soft skills, but there are things that are very important to me. Like Sunday dinners are very important to me. When on Sundays, I cook Sunday dinners because that was a tradition within my own upbringing. And my Sunday dinner, as someone who, we eat salmon and, crab and stuff, but on Sundays we eat a country meal. It's going to be fried chicken, baked macaroni and cheese, and collard greens, or it's going to be stew.
And these are traditions that come from your mother, your grandmothers, right? And so why is it important for you to continue those traditions with your daughter?
Well, it's the Black culture. I really want her to understand her roots and where she comes from. We're from the South. And so now we're living in what is considered the North. I'm not raising my child in the South. And I believe that the South has a lot of culture and a lot of traditions and a lot of customs. And even though my child is not going to experience all of that, even though my child is not going to experience all of that, I still want her to have some of those experiences, because I want my grandchildren to have those experiences. I want my great grandchildren, like, I don't want some of those things to go away. When I'm cooking food, I'm telling her stories about how Aunt Betty Ann has the best baked macaroni and cheese in the whole family. Nobody can touch her baked macaroni and cheese. Or when you
Aunt Betty Ann,
right? Or when you frying chicken, you better you don't just wash it off with water. You got to get you a lemon and you got to scrub it. Like, I need you to know the things that my family has shared with me around stories with food, and even the way that I'm preparing food. Like my grandmother would stand up and she would be in the kitchen and she would be cleaning her meat or shucking her corn or, snapping her peas. Like, I want you to see that because I don't want that tradition to die. You know what I mean? My grandmother is not here anymore, but I need my daughter to take those things and keep that going within our family, because if she doesn't have it, it gets lost. And I'm just big on Black history. Like, I don't want our history and our tradition.
That part. Yeah. So you said something earlier that I want to go back to, right? So you spoke about your mom always working, right? And we know that historically, we know through our own lived experiences that as Black women, like, we labor a lot, right? And we do not want to spend our lives laboring. Like, I do not desire labor. Right? I have said that many times. So this documentary is all about Black women, their mothers, grandmothers, right? And radical self-care as a means for survival. So I want to talk about that, right? Like, self-care and what that means as Black women. And when I think about just my own experience, right? Like, with my own mother, one of the things that came up for me when I was watching this documentary is like, yo, my mother used to always take a nap. Okay. Like, sis she could be sitting on the couch, and when she closed her eyes, you know that she's taking a nap, or she's going to go in the room and she's going to lay down. Sis, when I tell you, I understand that now more than ever. Like, as a grown woman, as a mother myself, I understand that nap that Angie was taking. Okay. And so, like, okay, sometimes you just need to lay it down for a minute. Sometimes I need to close my eyes. Like, to me, those are self-care measures. Right? It could be the smallest things, right? Self-care isn't always a grand spa day or a vacation. Girl, I'm here for all that too. Like, let's be clear. But that little nap is important. And like I said, I understand that nap that my mother was taking now more than I ever have. Like, as we get older, like, we see more of our mothers and our grandmothers in us, right? So my question is, you know me, I love this saying. I don't even know where it originated, but Black joy is an act of resistance. Right. So what is it that you want to, or you hope to teach your daughter about self-care and joy as a Black girl growing into a Black woman?
I don't want her to lose her joy. Like, I think that, like, for me, I have always known, this is a Bible verse, but I've always known that I'm a light, and that can bother spirits around you. It's so interesting because I was reading over that and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna tell this story. But a lot of times everybody cannot access their joy because they're so burdened down by whatever, the day-to-day, whether it's the kids, the husband, the world, the racism, the discrimination, the world affairs. Like, all things can really bog you down. And it's only your joy that's going to keep you alive. You know what I mean? Like, joy it's not only an act of resistance, but it's going to be the way that you stay alive, because stress will take you out. And if you can't find a time to laugh, which I believe every time you do laugh, you are relieving some form of stress, you're cutting your life short. And so I think for my daughter, it's funny because today she has, like, played and flipped around. Mind you, I have a 12-year-old. She's going to be 13 in November. But my baby she still plays and flips around. She just enjoys her little life. And sometimes I'm just like, if you don't sit down somewhere, that's what I be saying in my head. But then I say to myself, like, let that girl be a kid. You know what I mean? Just like, why? There's so many of us that she is living a life at 12 that I did not get to live because I saw too much traumatically, and or I was traumatized by seeing so much. And I just had so many things going on that was impacting my worldview. That innocence just wasn't there. She's just been allowed to be a kid. And so sometimes, as much as I want to be like, stop flipping over my furniture, it's just like, baby, do you? You know what I mean? Do you, sis?
Yeah. And I love that. So you and I are both career educators, right? We've been teachers, we've been leaders. When you were just talking about, like, your baby's joy, right? It made me think about the experience that our Black girls are having in school, right? So you and I both know through research, right? But also through our own experiences in these schools, like what our Black girls are going through, right? And they don't feel joy at school, right? Their sense of belonging is not where it should be in what should be a safe space, right? Like in school. And so when I think about that, and we can pull up all the articles, right, on discipline of Black girls in schools, on like how Black girls feel in school and what is happening to them. We could go on and on about the negative stuff. And so when I hear you say that your daughter is just so useful and joyful, like I love that. And I want more of that for our Black girls. And I know that you are doing a lot of work, which we're going to talk about in a second, around Black girlhood and building our Black girls. So I do want to get to that. So of course, you my sister, you my friend. But you are also the founder of an amazing organization called Empowering Her Destiny. So can you talk a little bit about what your organization is, the mission, and the work that you're doing in service of Black girls? I do want to start off by
saying that if you would have asked me at the age of 12 or 16 or what have you, would I be leading this organization? I probably would have never thought so. But this actually was really my steps being ordered. I truly believe, in my leadership journey in the schools, I was dropped off at an all-girls middle school in the middle of Baltimore. And when I went there, I was just like, where the hell am I? Get me the hell out of here. This is crazy, right? Because for real, as an educator, I really just got along with the boys. They are so chill. I enjoyed the boys. The girls had too much drama. I was just like, y'all are draining. But then I became a principal of an all-girls middle school, and it was the most beautiful experience ever. And it grew a love of little Black girls, but it also grew a love of Black women. As it relates for girls, it really allowed me to see middle school being that area in that time where there is so much happening to children, but the adults around them are not tracking that they're still children and that they're growing, and they're almost looking at them as adults. And that perception is shaping their interactions with them. And simultaneously, some of the girls are coming in with so much trauma that they are resistant to adult figures that may remind them of their mothers. And just thinking about all of those intersections of experiences on both sides really shaping the way that little girls are treated. In that experience, I really got a chance to I was not one of those principals I'm going to suspend you as soon as something happens. I really wanted to get to the heart of who these young girls were. And so by being a principal, you saw building relationships with these young Black girls and really seeing that when things happened, you saw humanity, because the relationship that I would have with them, you would notice that they would not even want to disappoint me. And so you were able to see the impulsivity, which is developmentally appropriate, the identity exploration, which is developmentally appropriate, peer influence, which is developmentally appropriate, testing waters, which is developmentally appropriate, using their voices, which is developmentally appropriate. You saw all of these.
Yeah. But somehow when our girls do that, our Black girls do that in the way that they do it, we do it.
Yeah, they are. And they're not just punished by white teachers. They're punished by Black teachers too. And Black women.
Absolutely. Unfortunately. And that's too what this is about, right? That complex relationship between Black women and Black girls. And those mother-daughter relationships and those mommy wounds, right? What you're talking about is a product of those things. And so, look, we can have a conversation about that all day, honey. We both are very open about therapy and all of those things. But there's a lot that needs to be addressed with some of us. And it is unfortunate that, some of us are perpetuating this unfortunate cycle with our girls. But I want to let you continue to talk about the work of your organization. We did a lot of work
around bias training. We presented a research around the adultification of Black girls. We brought out the push out, which, Monique has done a lot of work in there. And if she ever sees this video, I'm sorry for not calling you doctor. I just don't have all the names there. But there's just so much language and so much research. And also how, the discipline system is really the judicial system. So as someone in that position, I had the choice whether or not I was going to keep going in this direction. Am I going to prepare these girls to Am I going to make this a jail in this school? Or am I going to really pause and take the time and allow them to make mistakes and come back around and be like, okay, well, let's talk about this mistake and restore it. But also let's talk about like, who do you want to be? What caused you to have this? Like what caused you to, make some of these mistakes? What were you thinking? What can you do next time? And just really like make sure that we're creating environments that allow our girls to be free. Like you're going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, right? You have
and
that
giving them that space
and you have that
and that grace to grow.
Because I'm looking at your humanity and not just, be in line, get to class on time, do this. So that was my whole experience. So left the principalship. And of course I started doing some work with Black women because I started there. That was my dissertation topic for a while, just thinking about the push out of Black women, because that happens too. Just like Black girls are pushed out of schools, Black women are pushed out of executive leadership positions, whether it's superintendents, whether it's people that are in corporate America, just all over the place, and, Black men as well. But my focus was on Black women. And then one day I was called down in my hometown by my mom, who is a doctor within she has a private practice down there.
Trailblazer. Yes. That's what she is.
She has a doctor's office down there. And she said, these girls are coming in here and they are pretty much like, yes, I'm diagnosing them one way, but these girls have low self-esteem and there is no one pouring into them anywhere. In fact, the people and the roles that should be pouring into them are tearing them down even more. And so I began to kind of like think about how the layering of school, like school is supposed to be this place that's supposed to help you discover who you are. It's supposed to help you dream. But instead, what in some spaces, because I don't want to say all schools, but in some spaces, it's doing the exact opposite. And so now we have these little Black girls that are coming out of these spaces feeling defeated, feeling a lack of confidence, not having any preparation for what they want to be, and not even able to dream, you know what I mean? Which is very important. So I did a workshop called Journey to Confidence. Yeah. And I was just like, it was fun. And it was great. I mean, I'm good at what I do. Like I'm good with children, with girls.
I'm good at what I do.
Done, okay, I transform. Okay.
Okay.
The families were just like, my God,
that's right.
My daughter was, she wouldn't speak to anyone. Now she is like, introducing herself, and she has a new group of friends. We sent, getting girls enrolled in college and all kinds of things. So I'm sitting at my computer one day and God was just like, oh, we need you to start this nonprofit. And I was just like, first of all, I'm working on my business. What you talking about this nonprofit? Child, April 21st, 2000, which is so funny. We're doing this podcast. This is year 3 of or is it actually year 3 or year 4? I'm losing track of time. Blame it on COVID.
Yay, we love PhD.
Yeah, so we are now going into our 3rd year. Next year will be our 3rd year of programming and 4th year of operation. So it's 4 years. Is it? It's 3 years. Okay, my bad. So PhD is a nonprofit organization that transforms Black girls' lives. That's essentially what we do. And we do that. Our secret sauce is we increase their confidence. And this year we're expanding our programming to make sure that their confidence is increased in the spaces of digital literacy, health literacy, career literacy, as well as political literacy. And political literacy has been a dream of mine.
Yes.
I think political literacy is very important. I feel like sometimes when I'm listening to adults talk about, the elections and politics, I'm just like, please go back to school. You do not know what you're talking about. I just don't talk, right? And I've always had a philosophy of education that we need to make sure that we're growing children, because children will transform adults' minds and children will transform their own communities. And so all of those literacies are to raise this Black confident girl, which every single year, our survey results have said that all of our girls are feeling even more confident by going through our program. Last year, or in our first year, we sent our first girl to college for culinary arts. So she's working on being a chef, and we gave her a scholarship for it. And so we're just we're expanding, we're doing the work, and we're just really trying to save Black girls' lives, to be honest with you. And we want them to dream. And it's not even about saving their lives at the minimal level. Like, we want Black girls to thrive. Surviving is so 1921.
Listen,
surviving is not, we come out of the womb
no.
surviving. Let's talk about thriving. That is the goal. So my mind never is about survival. And anytime that,
Yeah.
you know, I'm thinking about something, I always have to assess whether or not, are we talking about surviving or thriving? And I'm always going to be talking about thriving. So I always have to even check my own biases because it's about overflow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thriving, honey. Like liberation. That's what this whole thing is about, right? Let's liberate Black children, period. You know, yes, our Black girls, but our Black children, period. But I do, sis, you know, you my sister, you know, I love you, but I do want to give you your flowers right now and just commend you on the work that you're doing with Empowering Her Destiny, aka EHD, because I've seen it in action, right? And I've been a part of some of your events. And I think that it's so important because remember in the beginning of this, we were talking about, you know, like Black girls and your self-concept and that coming from the relationships that you have with your, you know, your mothers and your grandmothers. But, you know, let's take that a step further. You know how we do in Black culture, right? We have a village, right? It's not just the people who are in your bloodline, your lineage, right? Sometimes you may need a mother figure in the village. I think one of the things that EHD does is it provides those links or those missing links if girls need it. And you're giving them some really powerful things that they're working on, right? That they're developing in this stage of their life. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, jump in whenever, but Empowering Her Destiny services girls 12 through 17. Yes. And so that point in their life, we know is extremely important, right? The preteen and teenage years where they are so impressionable, where they are looking for guidance and where they're looking for comfort. And we want to make sure that we can restore that relationship and that trust between Black girls and Black women. And so I think you're doing the work. And so I say thank you on behalf of, you know, the culture, girl. Thank you so much for doing that work. I do want to, before we get out of here, I do want to bring up, you just been saying a whole bunch of good stuff. And I'm like keeping notes in my mind. So earlier, you talked about this intimacy that you have with your grandmother. I know we're jumping around topics a little bit, but it also made me think about another part in the documentary. There was a woman who was talking about when her grandmother was transitioning. She was at the end of her life, and her mother was right there by her side, right there by her. It was her grandmother, so her mother's side. And she said she never left her. And she said it was a beautiful transition. And I was just thinking about the intimacy in that, right? And just the thought of the strength of their relationship where you have this mother and her daughter who are joined, like, I don't even know how else to describe it, in such a strong bond that this daughter is like, I am not leaving your side. Like, I'm going to see this transition through with you as far as I can. Like, I'm going to send you on your journey. And so she spoke about her mother, you know, sitting there and, you know, like giving her mother a kiss as she left, right? As she took her last breath. And so when I think about that type of intimacy, like that is something that I think is invaluable, right? For girls and women. So it also made me think about my mother. And this is not something that I have spoken about with my mother, but this is a story that I got from my father because he was also there. So when my grandmother was transitioning, my mother's mother, she was sick. My mother did not leave her side. The doctors were like, it's, you know, like any time now, you know, if you want to come out. My mother said, I'm not leaving her side. And so my mother was also there until my grandmother took her last breath. And so when I think about, you know, just that relationship and, you know, what that meant to her, what that meant to my mother, right? To be there for her mother. That's a conversation that I do want to have with her and just hear more about her experience. And so, you know, like as we think about this conversation in this documentary, and I'm so glad that I came across it, you know, and if you haven't seen the documentary, the last day that it will be on Netflix is May 5th. So it's actually leaving Netflix soon. So everybody out there who's watching the podcast, if you haven't seen In Our Mother's Gardens, check it out. Last day on Netflix is May 5th. But it just made me think about that. And so, you know, as I keep this conversation that we're having in this documentary in the top of my mind, like I have made some vows to myself to just learn more about my mother, because what I'm seeing is that I am turning more into her as I get older, right? And some of her experiences, and you know, some of her experiences that I saw from like a child's point of view, I feel like I understand better. And so I challenge, you know, other Black women out there to do the same thing. and some people have, strained relationships or what have you, but, make the effort to learn about your mothers and your grandmothers. I know in the beginning of our conversation, you talked about, your maternal and your paternal grandparents. And so I'm going to mention now my dad's side, right? Because like I said, I feel extremely grateful to have known all four of my grandparents. So my grandparents on both sides and, two of my great grandparents. And so my grandmother on my father's side, we're going to call her name Gloria, right? One of the sweetest souls you will have ever met. Amazing woman. And if we're talking about lineage, so many people came from this woman, okay? She was a mother of 10 children, my father being one of them. And out of those 10 children came so many grandchildren, right? I grew up in a huge family with a lot of cousins. Just on my dad's side alone. But, she was a matriarch and like I said, one of the sweetest souls you would have ever met. She was an alumnus of the historic Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. My father's side of the family is, from D.C. My grandparents were from here. And my great-grandmother, we're going to call her name too, Cecilia. Right. I grew up remembering like going to her birthday parties, right? She always had a birthday party. And I feel like that's where I fell in love with dancing. Like I would always see like my grandfather and his brothers and stuff like hand dancing. Like my family is a big dance family. My grandmother, there's a picture, my great grandmother, picture of her in a newspaper. She was a senior, right? And she was still dancing, like she was performing and all that. And so I just want to give light to that too. And so when I think about, my grandmothers and my great grandmothers on both sides of my family, I can start to unpack and see how it has shaped who I am today. And so I'm grateful and I give thanks for that. We're researchers, right? And so, I'm gonna wrap this up with an article that I came across when I was doing my research about this conversation, because I'm just like, I feel like we're talking about this, like this relationship between mothers and daughters, but I wanted to see like what the body of research was saying. And so I did come across an article and I was happy to see that like we are doing our research, right? Like we have to tell our own stories. We have to. And so I came across an article titled Raising Resilient Black Women, a study of superwoman mothering and strength as a form of gendered racial socialization and Black mother-daughter relationships. Now, I didn't get a chance to read this entire article, but I'm excited to dig into it. And so I wanted to raise that here today. And so the authors said they saw a gap in the research with exploring, and this is a quote from their abstract, exploring young Black women's identity development in relation to their interpretation of how their mothers conveyed certain beliefs and values to them and how they navigate society and, cultivate their own self-concept. And so I did want to raise that if anybody wants to look, further into this topic from a research standpoint. But I did find, several articles out there and I'm like, yes, we are doing the work and we're telling our own stories. So to end our conversation today, sis, I want to say thank you again 1,000 times. I appreciate you. I love hearing your perspective. But most of all, I love being able to be a part of your village and having a front seat to how you mother your daughter. I think you're an amazing mom and you're doing a great job. So keep it up. And thank you for the work that you're doing with EHD too, because
we need free women to do it. We need liberated
women. It's for real
women.
and it's serious. And we need people like you to do it. So thank you.
And I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited about the Black
period, that part.
Renaissance woman. You're just doing this is just amazing. I love, there's no one in the Renaissance doing it like this. So I enjoyed the documentary. I'm looking forward to other recommendations and following this journey because I love documentaries too. So let me know what the next one is because I'm going to be following along as you interview. Look, I
got a few sweater on.
Did y'all see
on
that?
The list. I'm ready. I'm excited. I love history and I love
Don't play with her, okay? Don't see look out. Girl, only you gonna make a sweatshirt look cute.
I love the documentary style. Listen, I just love thank you, girl. I love just learning about the Black experience, and I love making connections to our history and where we are today. And I think it's so important for our Black history and our ways of being and our lives to be documented. And that's on Zora Neale Hurston. Okay, hello, period.
Absolutely, so, you're doing it.
I'm here for that. I'm here for our stories. Proud of you. And so, that's what I'm trying to do here.
Many more to go.
That's it, girl. Thank you so much. And that's a wrap on episode 1.